Hello, friends, and welcome to the Weekend Catch-Up Club, the coffee morning show brought to you live every Saturday and available later on demand at youtube.com/gamertagged and podcast services. Grab a cup of coffee, grab some snacks, and hang out with us for just a little bit because today's special guest is none other than the narrative designer at Sumo Digital, Sarah Longthorne, joins us today. Sarah, how are you doing?
I'm doing okay. I'm nervous as always, but what's life without a little adrenaline? So
Absolutely. There's nothing to worry about. It should be a really fun chat and just chatting about video games. And of course, the fact that you are MCV's 30 under 30 for 2021. Congratulations.
Thank you. Yeah, I still can't really get my head around that, but it feels really good. Anxiety, lots of anxiety, but I think that's just the theme of everything in my life. But yeah, I'm really excited about that.
You must be getting just inundated with all these requests to guest appear on different things now that you're like celebrity status, right?
I don't know about that, but I've had a few things. I actually have another podcast that I'm doing directly after this one, so yeah, not nerve-wracking at all.
No. So can you tell our audience exactly who Sarah Longthorne is and what you do at Sumo Digital?
Okay, Sarah Longthorne is a writer and narrative designer. Yeah, I'm a writer and narrative designer at Sumo Digital Nottingham. I guess what's most useful to know. I went to uni at the University of East Anglia in 2011. I studied script writing and performance, worked in marketing for 4 years, and 2 of those years at Jagex in their email team. I was trying to sort of worm my way into doing more writing, and I managed to get some really cool experience there. But ultimately, like, they weren't hiring for anything, so that I could do. So I jumped ship and sort of took a bit of a gamble on being a freelance narrative designer. And after 2 months of very scant work that was just enough to get by, I managed to get some job offers for in-house work, and I joined Fusebox, working on Love Island, the game, which was a lot of fun. So yeah, I then worked there for 9 months, and then I got an email from one of the recruitment team at Sumo. And here I am.
Wow. And how long have you been at Sumo for now?
Exactly 2 years, as of like 3 days ago. I just got the email a few days ago. It's very exciting.
So a little anniversary. So congratulations on your work anniversary. So how's it been? How's it been working for at least a full year in lockdown on like a game and game development and stuff?
For me, it's actually been fine. I'm a massive introvert. I don't like going outside anyway, so it suited me really well. I was like, great, I can work in my pajamas. I can get up at 5 minutes to 10, be at work, keep my camera off. No one knows that I'm in, pajamas with like a slight ketchup stain on the side. It's fine. So that worked out really well. I think I've been quite fortunate because I live here with my partner and we've got our cats in the garden. So it's not been too bad in comparison. So like Sumo was really, really good actually with the transition to working from home. Like we were set up and everything pretty much immediately. They handled it really well. They're continuing to handle it well. There's been some tech issues as always,
Sure.
Especially like the way Sumo works is that we're often co-deving on projects with like other studios. So, the studios that are further away and stuff, that can cause some issues sometimes. But it's been fine.
That's good. I mean, that's always the funny thing is like whether you're like a content creator or a Twitch streamer or somebody who has a reasonable setup at home anyway, the transition's actually been not too painful, aside from technical things like being able to connect to different servers and things like that, which can only really be done seamlessly in the office, and setting up that remote access stuff can be quite problematic. But in terms of like video conferencing and like being only dress your upper body versus your kind of pajama bottoms and stuff, it seems to have been an okay transition for the most part. So it's
exactly
great to hear it's been okay for you as well.
Thank you. I think Introverts won the last year.
I think so. I think you're absolutely right. So double BAFTA winner, Sumo Digital. Best British game, best family game for Sackboy: A Big Adventure, which launched last year on the PlayStation 5 and, of course, the PlayStation 4 as well. That's got to feel pretty good.
It does, in the sense that I'm extremely proud of the Sumo family. I didn't actually work on Sackboy, so I can't take any credit there except for being
Take all the credit.
my
Take all
friends
the
are
credit. It was
great.
you.
Oh yeah, I made the whole game. So yeah, the way Sumo works is that each studio kind of runs semi-individually. And that was created by Sumo Sheffield. So they've done an amazing, amazing job. And I wish I could have my name on those credits, but I do not. Because I was involved in other projects, but they've done such a good job, and they're really, really proud. I've got a few friends on that project, and they're really cool people.
Yeah. We a few months back, we were lucky enough to have a narrative designer on the show from Ubisoft, and she was talking about how such a new kind of profession that really is in terms of getting recognition, because it's not level design, it's not necessarily story, it's not necessarily writing. When you say narrative, it's so much broader than that. And I'd love to get your take on what narrative design is and what drew you to it.
I think it's so different from studio to studio. You can get, a job ad up for like Ubisoft, and then another one for a mobile game like Fusebox, and a multitude of other studios, and it'll be the same role, but the specs will be entirely different. So it really does vary. In my experience, my job as a narrative designer has always been very writing heavy, but it's kind of, I guess, the term narrative designer for me is just meant to encompass the fact that I don't just write. I have competency as someone who can design narrative systems as well, and make decisions about how we communicate narrative, and what kinds of delivery suit which kinds of games. And also just like having competency on a more technical level as well, with like handling branching architecture on like a large scale, things like that, rather than just being told, okay, write this and write that, which I think would underserve a games writer anyway, to say that their job isn't that. It's just that it's not. Yeah. But yeah, I guess that's what it encompasses for me.
Yeah. So you mentioned branching architecture there. So obviously that is going to vary from project to project, game style to game style. How complicated is just that in itself? Typically, can you go into a little bit of detail about branching architectures? Because it sounds fascinating.
So it's one of my one of the things I love most about interactive fiction. But it's one of those things where the more complex it is, the more you're probably needing to reel it in. It's the idea basically of like having a branching narrative and the whole shape of it, and this thing leads to this, and trying to. I think when you're writing interactive fiction with branching narratives, what you always want to be doing is bringing it in as much as possible to be economic with your word count. So, for example, with Love Island, the game, just season 2 alone ended up being over 700,000 words.
Wow.
And
okay.
If you take both seasons, it's well over 1 million as well. Both the first 2 seasons, sorry, there's a third one now, but it's well over 1 million words there. So each of us, I think I wrote 125,000 words for season 2. And that's that's the size of like a large novel, right?
Yeah.
But and that was us trying to be as economic as possible. Each player will still I think it's very hard to get an identical playthrough completely, but equally to make sure that it's not ballooning out even further than that, we're going to have to be really economical about trying to bring players back to the same narrative thread while feeling like it's still a bit different, by sort of peppering in little reminders to choices they've made before and things that have happened which are unique to their playthrough, and kind of giving that sense of this is your unique playthrough while still not having to write a different storyline every time something happens.
Yeah. Is it Is it difficult, and also I would imagine, hopefully, really fun to explore the different consequences or and repercussions of certain threads that you're
Yeah.
linking and chaining together?
Yeah, absolutely. I think I'm really fascinated by types of choices that you can make in games and the sort of the consequences of those and how they feel to players. So even though it's not my favorite game in terms of narrative, but one of my favorite games for narrative design is probably Life is Strange 2, which does this really interesting thing of combining both the branching architecture of Life is Strange 1 and the approach taken with a game like The Witcher 3.
Yeah.
So in Life is Strange 1, you make all these choices, but at the end, none of them really feed into that ending. It just comes down to, okay, I mean, spoilers, but do you want to save your friend or do you want to save the town? And you know exactly what you're choosing. You're saying, okay, if I choose to save my friend, I save my friend and the town dies. If I choose to save the town, I save the town dies. You know exactly what you're asking. You're
Mm.
basically saying, like, which cutscene do I want to see? Which it's got its own agency to it, but equally it's not really taking into account past choices or anything, which can feel a little bit unsatisfying.
Yeah.
And then you have something like The Witcher 3, where you don't really get that ending. Do you want to do this or that? It's all these little choices that are peppered in, and you don't even necessarily realize that you're making choices, or at least that you're making consequential ones, until it all sort of boils down to this outcome. And you don't feel that sense of like big agency where you're like, I decided this and this happened,
Yeah.
at least in the main storyline. But you do feel like your choices mattered and you had this sort of more almost insidious effect on the world. And Life is Strange 2 is so interesting because it combines both of those. You have your sort of the relationship with your brother being sort of like defined along the way, but then at the end you're also making this choice, which is very active, and then it can, whilst you kind of you know what you're choosing, it can still go one of two ways no matter what you choose. So
Hmm.
it's they managed to kind of get the best of both worlds with that.
Yeah.
Sorry, a
And
bit of a rant, but I
no,
love
no,
it.
that's brilliant. I'm happy to just sit and let you just go off and just talk for like an hour. So that's amazing. So really strong narrative games that have way more nuance to the choices seem to be quite few and far between, certainly in the big budget triple A
Mm,
space, whereas Life is Strange, The Walking Dead, they are very much like the indie, almost interactive novels where the choices carry over from episode to episode, and then the arc is
mm,
kind of giving the player some kind of agency and payoff at the end of it. And just recently, we got the release of the Mass Effect Legendary Edition, which is going to be fresh for a whole bunch of new players to make decisions in one game and then have a lot of those arcs pay off by not by the end of the game, but by the third game. And it's exciting to see the reaction on Twitter and stuff like that just this past week as to you can see people's thinking, oh, I wonder where this story arc is going to go. And then for the people like myself that played it way back in 2007, it's like just you wait to see where those threads go to. And other games like Detroit Become Human they literally show you the workflow of the mapping of different choices and
yeah.
consequences and where that can all take you. To plan something like that strikes me as must be so like crazy difficult and incredible. It boggles the mind how you work it all out.
It's definitely an interesting challenge, I think. One of my favorite things about being a game writer, specifically, rather than just like, standard writer of prose on its own, is that it has that puzzle element to it. I love puzzle games. They're probably my favorite genre alongside narrative. And yeah, it's not just about writing and about the skill of, choosing the right words. It's also about that puzzle of like, okay, does that fit here? If I do this, then have I left something out? How can I bring all this back together? How can I funnel this in? How can I condense this down, but make it satisfying? Trying to get that balance of like trying to be satisfying in what you're giving back to the player in in exchange for their choice, whilst also trying to fit within quite a slim margin, I guess. It's definitely challenging, but also so rewarding to get right, and you kind of just get a knack for it. I think I'd never done it before. Before I joined Fusebox, or at least did their writing test. And as part of the writing test, they sent a sample script, sort of an example sample script from Love Island. And I just basically looked at what they'd done and thought, okay, that's how you write interactive narrative. Okay, I'm going to do that now. And it just clicked. And it was just so fun. It's so much more fun.
How challenging is it to not lose the player? And if they pick a decision that maybe they're expecting it to go a certain way, and then maybe it doesn't go the way they were expecting, to keep them engaged and to not lose them, and think that they've made a terrible decision, they've kind of ruined their game, and then you've lost them narratively.
So I think if you're in that space, then you need to be very careful that it was intentional in the first place, right? Ideally, I think in the large majority of cases, ideally, you want the player to know exactly what they are getting into with a choice, at least in one way. And if they don't know what they're getting into, then that should be part of it. So that kind of is a positive and a negative for The Witcher. Sorry, it's my favorite game, so I always bring it up.
That's good. We're going to talk about your inspirations anyway, so that's fine. Good segue.
Oh, good. But yeah, so The Witcher does this really well and quite badly sometimes. So the way it does it well is in the sense that it's always navigating that space if there is no right or wrong answer. Each of these is a different flavor of shit. Which one do you want to lick? Sort of thing.
Yeah.
It's always going to be satisfying, but it's satisfying in the sense of like, oh, I have no idea what's going to happen because of this, and I want to see what happens, rather than satisfying the sense of I chose for this to happen and it happened, because you never quite know. So that's really good, and it navigates that in the correct way, because players have that expectation of being like, yeah, I know that it's not going to necessarily work out well, but that's kind of why I'm doing this. It's why I like this game. And I'm picking this just to see what happens. Because The Witcher has that great thing of always surprising you. The way that it does it badly is that sometimes in choices where it's not trying to go the sort of shades of grey route, it kind of muddies its intentions for the player. So there's one notable conversation with Kira Metz, where she's basically like, oh, I'm going to take these papers to that fascist king and it's going to go fine. And you have a choice of like 3 different options. And it's not actually very clear which one leads to, I'm going to kill you to stop you taking those papers to him, versus please don't take those papers to him. Let's go be friends in Kaer Morhen. So, so it's very easy to get that wrong. And I think with those ones where you have to kind of be able to discern which kinds of choices you need to be very clear on. And those are the kinds of ones where the player needs to be level with you on exactly what they're getting themselves into, or it's going to be frustrating and you're going to lose them.
Yeah, The Witcher 3 is clearly a showcase for weaving narrative branches.
Oh yeah.
And one of the most, I guess, visible quest lines is, of course, the Body Baron quest line. And multiple times I've played that expecting to, and I know this is spoilers, but too bad, viewers and listeners, if you haven't played The Witcher 3, it's your own fault by now. You've had 5 years, or maybe 6 years. But I continually try to save the Bloody Baron, but for some reason, the way that it stacks emotion and choices for that quest line, I always end up driving the Bloody Baron to hang himself, and I'm always completely shocked by the end of it, like totally shocked, because whether it's just Geralt like snapping at him in the moment of dialogue, and that just is enough to push him over the edge to feel incredibly responsible for his actions, and then I come back to the castle and I find him swinging from a tree, and I'm genuinely mortified and shocked because I was trying to bring him peace ultimately for his quest line, and the game never lost me once. It was that unexpected, oh shit, that's what happened because of my decisions. and I love that. I love it when it does. It gives you a hint of where it's going to go, but when it completely catches you off guard, and you've lost a character, a main character in the game from your decisions, you're thinking, "Whoa, that was quite incredible." The way that the writing, the design, everything weaved to such a way that I just wasn't expecting that outcome. And other games, we mentioned Detroit, we mentioned Life is Strange and Walking Dead. The repercussions of siding with somebody earlier in the game and then that coming back to either bite you in the ass later on or working in your favor. If it's unexpected, it can be really quite an incredible achievement.
Absolutely. Yeah, I completely agree. I think actually, speaking more about The Witcher, the way that they've structured the entire game is actually very clever in terms of actually keeping it quite simple. So a lot of especially the side quests, a lot of them don't actually, the choices don't factor into anything else later on. They've kind of, if you look at the main quest on its own, you just have lots of small flavor choices, and then right at the end, you've got like sort of, well, not right at the end, but towards the end, you have your more impactful choices with Siri, which don't really actually pay off until right at the end.
Yeah.
And so they've kept that actually very, very linear. And then to kind of satisfy the player's need for making a decision, because obviously that's part of the reason why they bought the game, they've peppered all these very finite choices into side quests, which don't influence each other. So you kind of have this like crumple structure where you've got the main quest and everything there, you need everything there, and then all these side quests, if you had like less budget, or if time spans are running low, you could feasibly get rid of them and it wouldn't affect the main game. And they're able to come to a more decisive conclusion with like a clean split between this outcome and that outcome without affecting anything else, and can be done in any order. And it kind of creates this sense of, as you're playing through, you're still making these choices and you're seeing these big impacts, but because they're in their own little bubbles, it doesn't complicate anything else. So you're just writing these individual stories, and then the player, because they're doing these side quests along the way, kind of gets that sense of, yeah, I'm making loads of impact on this world. And sometimes when there is a more wide-reaching impact, is something like an asset change. Like with some of the political storylines, it's literally like, yeah, some of the assets in Novigrad change and some of the bark lines change, but none of the story changes, at least maybe not for a few lines. So it's very clever because they managed to get that feeling that you're impacting everything and making all these choices whilst actually keeping it quite separate.
It must. I mean, that sounds incredibly challenging. So how challenging is it to because game development can change radically at times, and it can completely change the flow and the pacing of certain quest lines. How challenging is it to, if something were to change and it has the knock-on effect of no longer making a side quest fit where it was originally designed to like appear or to fit in with the player's actions at that given point? How challenging is it then to try and rebalance that and get it and still keep the player agency on the main quest line, but also hook them to get to deviate into whatever that side quest may have been before things got maybe shuffled around and changed?
Okay. That's a big one. I think the simple answer is that it's very, very difficult. Ultimately, someone up top is going to be making decisions about priorities, and the main quest will always be the priority. And a game which is, a big branching game which is designed smartly will always make it so that those side quests can be removed if needs be, or ideally shuffled around, and it won't impact too much. I'd say that decisions over that aren't something that I've personally had to come into contact with, because I'm sort of very mid-level still.
Sure.
So usually that's being handled by someone sort of above my pay grade. But difficult is the answer, and it's definitely difficult to deal with as someone on the ground who's then having to adapt and be like, okay, now this whole quest doesn't make sense, and we have to completely rewrite it. And a lot of studios, narrative is basically treated like the most flexible discipline. It's like, oh well, we need to prioritize gameplay, so narrative can can bend. And I understand that mentality in the terms of like, okay, it's words, we can always write more words. It's also not as bendy as people think it is if you want it to be good. So, and ideally, you want to be really measuring those things in tangent, I think.
Yeah.
But yeah.
I mean, it's
So I hope that
super.
answered your question.
No, it was great. It was super kind of interesting and fascinating as well. And my next kind of question that popped into my head there as you were talking about that, whether you know anything about this or not, we'll just kind of try it. But translations in different languages for narrative threads and beats. How do you have much experience with having something that's predominantly in English, so you know like the nuances of the language and where certain things are supposed to happen and resonate, but if it gets translated into another region, that it has to still have the same like effect, but maybe it doesn't translate that well.
I think the main time where that becomes a problem is when you have a game with lots of original nouns and a lot of original concepts, because those can be harder to translate because they are just completely new. And I've definitely encountered that before where the localization team is just like, there is no word for this thing. So localization is actually, it can be a very creative job. And I say this as someone who hasn't, I haven't localized anything, but I've worked with people who have, and it's incredibly creative because a lot of the time they'll come across like a joke or like that's like very much based in the nuance of the language, and it doesn't directly translate. So they've got to do this really creative job of like figuring out a way to still tell a joke, which is along those same sorts of lines, but in this different language. And it's actually like very difficult and like quite an accomplishment. So yeah.
Language is so like difficult to get certain nuances across as well. So I can imagine it could be fun and got to be super creative to say, is this going to offend or is this going to land the way we intended it? It can be a super interesting challenge for sure.
Absolutely. I mean, even just in English alone, like someone will write something and they're just like, this is fine because I understand this to mean this way. And then, yeah, other people on the team will read it and give feedback and be like, I was offended. So it's everyone reads things differently. And that's why I guess it's so great to work in a big team with people and be able to get that feedback and workshop things.
Yeah, totally. So what have been some of your, we talked about Witcher 3 being one of the biggest inspirations for you. What have been some of the other ones that have really done something for the narrative design and you thinking, man, that is amazing. I want to learn from that and adapt something that we're working on to bring it and then evolve the whole narrative design, maybe profession as well, to kind of add to this ever evolving set of skills?
So I'd say the two games that I really like for the narrative design are NeoCab and Signs of the Sojourner. I hope I'm saying that right.
Okay.
So NeoCab, it is more of like a standard branching architecture, but it's based around this idea of an emotion matrix. The main character basically has kind of the equivalent of a mood ring. And so you're constantly looking at their mood. And depending on what their mood is, like some different conversation options might be ruled out. So you're kind of always looking at their mood and trying to sort of like get it where you want it to be able to choose certain options. But sometimes it's like sometimes you can do that through the options you choose, like by choosing to say a certain thing, it might lift the character's mood or like, deplete it. But also there are some things which are out of their control, like how other people treat them, which can in turn be affected by how they treat those people and their own mood. So I found that really interesting just because I'm fascinated by emotions and how they work. So that was cool. But Signs of the Sojourner was, I think, the most interesting for narrative design for me because the narrative design was the game design. It's basically this card game which is more about cooperation than competition. So the cards represent different ways of communicating with people, and you want to try and match the same cards as the person you're speaking with to kind of meet them on their level and find a chord. which is difficult when you meet people who just like communicate in a totally different way, and you're making choices about, okay, do I want to potentially not be able to connect with this person, but still be able to connect with the people that I love back home? Or am I going to let the people that I meet change me just so that I can kind of connect with all of them?
Right.
So it kind of, through its design alone, you create this narrative for yourself where, maybe you go off and explore the world and become a different person, and people don't really get you when you come home, or maybe you try and leave home and it just doesn't work out because you're just too connected to the people you love back home. And it's very organic, very interesting. So yeah, I think those are probably two of the most interesting for me, if I'm not talking strictly about branching architecture as well. Because if I'm talking about branching architecture, then for strictly, choice-based games, then I would definitely have to pick what's it called, Detroit Become Human, because as you say, yeah. Oh, I mean, the game has its issues, but in terms of like looking at it from a narrative designer's point of view, I was very impressed and I really enjoyed it.
Yeah. That's a game where I was playing and I you're doing the QTEs, you're making different decisions without necessarily knowing where it's going to go. And when you get to that end level and you see the entire workflow of where it could have gone, it is a mind-blowing. And that it felt like it was lifting the curtain behind all of the different consequences where the game could have gone, which maybe other games are doing with different consequences and narrative choices, but they never actually show you laid out in a flow diagram. This is what could have happened and all the different variations. The Disco Elysium, I think, is one that is very much like a text point and click adventure, but the way in which it does its narrative and its consequences and the way you can kind of like build a character as well, and it's so weird, that game, but you literally never know where it's going to go or what the impact you're going to have on the characters. And I just wanted to kind of throw that out there as well, because I've only played a little bit of it, but I know it got a lot of praise when it originally came out on PC. I think it was last year. But it seems like narrative design is permeating or coming to the forefront of game design more and more. It's not necessarily just for the indie scene, which is kind of where it was really flourishing. That's what it felt anyway. But bigger and bigger games are trying to utilize it in such interesting ways, and that's hugely exciting to see as a gamer and somebody who loves the industry and loves talking about games, and to people who make them. That's super exciting to see where it's going to go next.
Absolutely, yeah. So I must confess, I haven't finished Disco Elysium either. I've played about 2 hours, and it's probably the best writing I've seen in games. It's absolutely beautiful. But I do need to play more of it. I'm so starkly aware of that.
Too little time, way too many games to play. That's the problem.
Exactly.
So just out of curiosity, what are you playing just now?
Ooh, what am I playing just now? I've been playing a lot of Phasmophobia with some friends. So have you played that?
I don't have a PC, so I have not. But I do have friends that have been playing it, and they're trying to get the attention of Yvette Fielding on Twitter, because it's like the ghost thing, that the TV show that she used to do. So they're trying to like get her attention to maybe join a stream or something like that.
Oh my god,
that would be
incredible!
Hilarious.
I love it.
But it looks terrifying. It looks absolutely terrifying.
Yeah. The thing is, I usually can't deal with scary games. I can deal with scary films absolutely fine, but there's something about the agency of being in that driver's seat and knowing, like, I'm not like, if I'm watching a film, it's like, okay, I know there's going to be a jump scare. I can't do anything about it unless I stop watching the film. So I guess I'm going to get scared. But with a game, it's like, there's a door. I know I'm going to get scared, and it's on me to trigger my own jump scare. And there's just something about that which is completely different. I can't handle most scary games. I played Pacify recently, which is like, you can't leave the house. You're kind of just being chased around by this grudge girl, like, from the start, and you can't leave until you're done. And I was so scared that the first time I saw her, I just like mashed everything on my keyboard until I was out of the game. and then my friends coerced me into coming back, and so I did. And within 5 minutes, I lasted about 2.5 minutes longer or something. But yeah, within about 5 minutes, I just found a little corner to stand in. I just stood there and stared at the wall and just waited for death. But yeah, Phasmophobia, for some reason, I think it's because it's more paced out. You kind of generally you don't get many like hunts or anything for at least a few minutes, and it's a little bit more chill and cooperative, at least at the start, and the pace is like a little lower. So it's more my bag. But yeah, as soon as the hunt starts, I'm just like panicking. So I've been playing a lot of that.
I'm assuming you play that in VR, of course, right?
So that's a fun story. The only scary game I played in VR was the last Resident Evil. And I've only played about half an hour, but it was back when I worked at Jagex, and they had a couple of VR headsets hooked up in the dining hall, and I was playing it. And little did I know that the entire executive board was stood behind me watching as I was just like screaming and swearing. So that's fun. Phasmophobia. I've been playing some Hood, which is Sumo Newcastle game, which is a lot of fun.
Of course, that just came out as well, right? I was going to mention that as well, actually. Yeah. So just came out. You can tell us a little bit about that maybe later on if you want. Yeah.
Later on. That sounds good. So yeah, a bit of Hood, and then on the single player front, recently finished. I think the most recent thing was Gorogoa. Which if you played that one?
I have not, but I have heard of it.
Oh, so good. As I mentioned, I love puzzle games, and it's so satisfying. It's beautiful, and it's so satisfying to use lateral thinking and sort of abstract thinking to solve these puzzles, because it always surprises you when you find out you can do something, but it's always like, oh, I should have figured out that you could do that, but it just feels really, really good. So that's definitely one of my favorite games now, but that was quite a recent one. But yeah.
I'm going to check that. I'm going to go check that out now. But you raise a really interesting point about game development in general, like all games that have a puzzle mechanic, because I can imagine that designing that for the player, for all players, has to be satisfying. It's got to be satisfying as hell to solve it. So the player feels like they're really smart. But at the same time, it can't be too difficult, because then there's no satisfaction to solving it, or too difficult that you can't solve it, and then the player just quits the game because they can't solve the game, or they have to look up a guide or something, and then there's no satisfaction there. That must be such a difficult balancing act, because I'm just playing through Shadow of the Tomb Raider. Because I missed it at launch, but I just picked it up recently, and I'm having a great time with it. And the puzzles in there, it is that kind of Uncharted style of adventure, crypt tombing, like puzzle solving and stuff. Move the levers, bounce the light around, this kind of stuff. But when I first into the area, I'm really scratching my head. Say, okay, I've played video games for over 30 years. I've done every single puzzle that you could imagine, you would think. But I'm still really scratching my head as to what in the hell am I supposed to do in this environment? What am I? And it's such a skill to be able to take an environment and create a puzzle which players think that they've seen time and time before, and they'll have such an easy time of solving it. But then it's something fresh and something different, and you're like, oh, that was actually really, really satisfying.
Yeah, I think it's a really hard line to walk, and I say this as someone, I don't design puzzles, but I love puzzle games, and it is such a hard line to walk between. I think actually a better way to approach this is that some of the best puzzle games, and also the best mystery games as well, sort of detective genre. The best ones are the ones that get you to do the detective work, where the agency is on you, and those always start with that feeling of like, I don't know what the hell is going on. And it's all the more satisfying when you figure it out because you did it on your own. I feel like the more a game helps you out, the less dopamine you get at the end. And I've been looking into detective games a lot recently, and looking at the difference between something like, Return of the Obra Dinn versus, I don't know, a game where it's basically pointing you to all the things like, what's it called? Heavy Rain. Like something like Heavy Rain is basically like you can't really miss anything because the game will ensure you get it, and you don't really feel that clever. You feel like the character was clever, but I wasn't clever.
Yeah.
But you play something like Her Story or like Obra Dinn, and you start the game feeling like I don't know what the hell's going on, but by the end you feel like you were really clever because you were the one who figured it out, not the character. I am the character. Like,
yeah. And it's falling into that immersive factor as well, isn't it? Then, because if you're the character solving it, then the game is doing a really good job of just reinforcing that on the narrative level of making like everything around the story and the mechanics is making you feel like you are that character solving that puzzle.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. And it's just so hard to then measure that against like not making it so difficult from the beginning that players just tune out, like, because I'm definitely a very impatient person myself. And actually the first time I picked up Obra Dinn, I played it for about half an hour. I was like, I don't really know what to do next. Don't really know what's going on. So I'll just leave this for another day. And I had to people had to be like, no, just carry on playing it for me to go back and really, really get into it. But, and that's the reason I haven't really continued with Outer Wilds either. I find sometimes having too much choice and too much vaguety is just like, I don't know what to do, so I'm just not going to do anything. But but everyone's different. I think a lot of people actually really revel in that. But yeah, striking that balance, definitely tricky.
Yeah, totally. I totally agree. I'm kind of the same. I used to really enjoy like the big open world games where you can just get fully immersed in the world and just wander around and explore it. Witcher, obviously, Skyrim before it were so good at kind of creating these believable worlds. But then something like Breath of the Wild comes along where it's not necessarily about its writing or its branching choices, but it's all about the mechanics that you can do in that game and the dungeons that are in there as well to utilize whether it's magnetism or gravity or the elements like fire and water and creating like ice platforms in order to solve the puzzles. It's like the entire environment is the puzzle for you to then try and create a narrative around it. It's like, how did you solve that? Well, I solved it this way when you're talking to your friends, and you're like, whoa, I did it completely differently. And of course, it spawns this whole thing about YouTube. Did you know you could do this in Breath of the Wild? And it's like all these other like people can create a bonfire, then jump on the glider, and then glide across the entire map. And I was thinking, Jesus, I didn't even think about using fire that way. I was just using it to cook my drumsticks and apple and create a health potion. I didn't even think about using it to fly up into the sky. It's crazy how other games utilize different mechanics and different narrative beats or systems to create experiences that are not necessarily what the developers maybe had intended. If that makes sense.
I think it's so interesting to think of like so many games where they've just got this like idea of like how things have always been in games, and therefore you get someone who will come in who's never played in a game in their life, and they'll be like, why can't I interact with this thing to do this? Why can't I use this to do this? And it just doesn't make any sense because they don't have that pre-established thing of, oh, it's a game, we don't interact with that. There was a really good series on YouTube recently. It was something like what games are like for a non-gamer, and this guy had been playing through a bunch of different games with his wife who didn't play games, and sort of getting her take on it. And it was really interesting from the design perspective to sort of get that refresher on the, oh yeah, like that's a really gamey thing, and it doesn't actually make sense. It doesn't carry over for someone who's not been playing games their whole life, like why you can't just do this thing. And it kind of, I think that sort of paying attention to people who don't play games doing it for the first time actually helps us become better designers, because it sort of highlights these areas that we've been taking for granted. And actually on that note, I've been really interested recently in playing games with friends who were saying like, oh, I'm not a gamer, games aren't made for me, I don't like games. But it's just because they think that games are just like all Fortnite. And
Yeah.
if you choose the right game, like those same people have been playing Sims since the age of 11, like religiously. And you're like,
Yeah.
well, that's a game. And I think I sat down with one of them to play Detroit Become Human. And it was just so fascinating watching the sorts of things that she was interested in versus the thing that she wasn't. Just thinking, like, how many more people would consider themselves gamers, or would consider gaming like a legit form of entertainment, who don't
Mm.
already. Like, if we were designing games to be appealing to lots of different tastes, like we're very much designing it for like one specific demographic in that sense. And
Yeah.
yeah, what if we do more things which are more like cooperative and more creative? You end
Yeah.
up attracting more people who, I mean, you've got like a massive mobile market. It's like the mobile market is absolutely huge, and yet we sort of like, oh, those aren't real games. But it's like, it seems like a silly business decision not to like make games for those people as well. So
Yeah. No, 100%. I mean, I remember I think it was a few years, the article I was reading on TechCrunch, it was saying that
mm,
the games industry is about 160 to 100, no, 150 to 160 billion-dollar industry. And I think it's about 90 of that was just the mobile market, maybe even more now,
yeah,
probably like a huge chunk of that now. And yeah, it's like, it's not just people think Candy Crush or Fruit Ninja or
mm,
something like that. And I know Fortnite and stuff is on mobile now, but you can have some really interesting experiences on the
yeah,
mobile. I remember Monument Valley being this huge breakout game, which was literally an isometric puzzle game, and
mm,
it was all about perspective, and it reminded me a lot of Fez, which was an Xbox Live Arcade game way back in early Xbox 360 era or thereabouts.
mm,
And again, it was like a platforming game, but it was all about perspective. So you would rotate the world to form the pathways, and Monument
yes,
Valley kind of tapped into something similar like that, but just on pressing, like touching the screen, and that was all you were doing
mm,
to navigate that. And my wife was addicted to it for crazy. So as soon as they announced new levels, she instantly bought the pack to get those 10
yeah,
extra levels and seeing what I could do, because it was very beautiful. At the same time, the aesthetic there was gorgeous,
mm,
and it was just like brain training sort of thing as well, because you're messing with perspective and puzzle solving. It was, but yeah, you're right. The mobile market is so huge that there is a lot of untapped stuff there. It's not necessarily just these microtransaction filled money grabbing games that are plenty of those, but there's also some really great examples of
yeah,
narrative adventures. I think there was one now that, because we just raised this, I don't have the name of it, but it was just a text message adventure. So because you're on your phone and everything was just like the speech bubbles going back and forth,
yeah.
the whole design of the game was like a messenger chat or a WhatsApp chat or something. So there's a lot of experimentation that hasn't really been tapped into yet.
Absolutely, yeah. I've actually been really interested in some of the essays by Brie Code. She's been writing a lot in the past about this idea of like femme game design, and the kind of game design that appeals to like a wider market and the sort of people that you'll get like playing mobile games. And a lot of it, from what I can recall of her research, it was things which are more cooperative, or things which allow
Mm,
for greater creativity or explore more interpersonal dynamics and things like that. Like, they appeal to so many more people, and I just don't know why we're not latching
yeah,
on to that with like, especially in AAA.
yeah,
Um, and like creating these experiences which like so many more people will love. Like, we know from games like, the likes of BioWare's games, or Life is Strange, that
mhm,
games which explore relationships and interpersonal dynamics and things are actually really popular, not just with women, but also with men across the gender spectrum. So,
yeah, yeah.
yeah, like, why aren't we doing more of that, I guess? But, and it kind of, I think when I first read her essays, it reminded me of my childhood when my two games, we only had like my mum's computer. And so that was all I had to play games on until the
Yep.
age of like 17. And the only two games I had to play were The Sims and Age of Empires. And in both of those, I didn't actually play the games as you were meant to play them. They were just
Yeah.
creativity toolboxes.
Yeah.
So I would play Age of Empires and I would just make maps. I would just make map after map after map. And then I'd play play Sims and I just make Sims and houses and never actually play the game.
Yeah.
And it just sort of goes to show, like, sometimes it's like a lot of the time games can be fantastic in ways that the developers didn't intend, and appeal to lots of different people who might not have the same tastes, where
Yeah.
it's more about creativity or more about exploring relationships. Like, I said that I played Detroit Become Human with my friend. She didn't want to handle the controller because she didn't like the stress of the QuickTime events,
Right.
but she really liked making decisions.
Mm.
So yeah, there's just so much to explore there and so much that's untapped. And I feel like a lot of publishers are just going with like the same formula of like, okay, we know this sells because that sold. So
Yeah.
we're going to just do this again. And games are just sort of this amalgamation of all the things that they know sell. So everything is open world now.
Yeah.
Everything has, crafting and stuff like that. And it's just like,
Yeah.
let's explore something different.
I 100% agree. One of the things that I would love for the industry to get to is a point where like really fun family games can be seen as like the masterpiece levels of the Pixar movies, rather than something getting Game of the Year, which can only be an incredibly tense, brutal, emotional experience like The Last of Us. And I love, as much as I love The Last of Us, looking at something like Tearaway Unfolded, which is one of my favorite games on the PlayStation 4, because what you were saying, creativity, bringing something like that, you can create shapes on your tablet in the real world, and then you can import them via like the PlayStation app into the game. So then you can design your costumes of little paper cuttings. You can design the snowflakes in the game, and I did like batarangs from Batman. So the game had this whole level where instead of snowflakes, it was these batarangs that were just falling down, and it was so fascinating for me because I could create my character. If I was a child, I could just doodle my outfit and then seamlessly
so cool.
bring it into the game. My character was dressed like Batman or Deadpool, and you could start affecting the game world with your real life creativity by just drawing like little paper cutting shapes. And I think we don't have enough of that kind of stuff, and I know Media Molecule are doing something pretty incredible with Dreams in terms of opening up the entire toolbox to everybody that just wants to create a game of some kind or an experience of some kind in that toolbox, which is fascinating to see what they can create, and it's there for anybody to just play. But I would love for games, the industry, to be able to recognize, actually, it doesn't have to be this incredibly tense, gritty adventure story to be recognized as a masterpiece. It can be something that uses the individual's creativity and their own kind of inspirations to create something that the game developer just thought, wow, we didn't even think about that. And that could be amazing.
Yeah, definitely. And it kind of reminds me of Sims. I recently realized that they had their own, on the Sims website, they've got a page where they just tell you all the cheats. And there's like, there's a paragraph at the top, and it's like, yeah, we're going to tell you what all the cheats are for our game because we actually think cheats are great and they're one of the best ways to experience The Sims. And it's kind of like, I read that and I was like, oh my God, they recognize people like me who didn't actually want to play the game, who just wanted to make things, because The Sims is a fantastic creativity tool.
Yeah.
And it was really cool that they've basically been like, yeah, like you can tick a box in the settings to say, yeah, I want to use mods. And I will spend a bunch of time like downloading like all my favorite furniture to make this beautiful house and everything. And it's great that the developers have said, like, we actually encourage this. We realize that a lot of people are using it this way, and please go ahead. That's just fantastic to me.
Yeah, it's the same hook and draw for something like Minecraft, isn't it? It's that the power of creation. Create whatever you want. Here's the toolkit, and just off you go. And then somebody builds like a giant Hogwarts entire world. Or I think somebody build like the entirety of Middle Earth
I heard about that
in Minecraft or something. It took them like a decade to do. It's like that's impressive.
Yeah, definitely. And then you kind of forget, like, oh yeah, aren't the things that like come to get you at night or something? I've not played Minecraft myself, but so sorry if that was a very ignorant thing to say. But yeah, they're like the mechanics, and it's like, oh shit, yeah, it's not just creating things. So yeah.
Yeah.
I love it when that happens.
100%. It's where games can go in unexpected ways, and where they have a unity with the player as well to create something and keep the game kind of top of mind as well. And you get communities that are fully invested in this entire platform and the systems, and you see that kind of that symbiosis between the developer and the player is beautiful to see when developers get it right and communities kind of
Absolutely
unify and build something. Yeah.
yeah,
So
absolutely.
Hood,
Yes.
Hood just came out. It came out of
Hood,
nowhere.
yes.
Tell me about Hood, because I saw it. I remember it when it first got revealed. I think it was last year, and it looked amazing. It looked really, really good fun, and I didn't even realize that it just came out. So like, it feels like a shadow drop. Anyway, it's out now. So can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure, yeah. So again, this one was by Sumo Newcastle. So most of the games I've worked on with Sumo aren't actually out yet and won't be out for a while. So, but yeah, Hood is fantastic. The team up in Newcastle are brilliant. I think Sumo Pune also worked on it. Great job. I've been playing it a lot with my friends, and I played it as part of an internal playtest as well, like a few months ago. And yeah, it's so much fun. It's a bit stressful right now because I keep getting matched with like level 90 players and I'm still level 12.
Oh.
And it's like my friends and I are all just like these little dinky level 10s or whatever. And then we'll go on and then we'll just get the other team filled with like level 90 and we're just like, do we want to stay? But it's
on the
so
first
much
day,
fun.
how do people get to level 90 on the first day? Yes. Yeah.
I think because they had, I guess, like a lot of people pre-ordered, right?
Yeah.
And people who pre-ordered played it like mad over the weekend. So I've got a friend who he's completely not in game dev at all, and it was a really nice thing to discover. I just asked him like, oh, like, do you guys want to play Herd? It's this game that one of the Sumo studios made, and he was like, oh, I've been playing it all weekend. I'm level 90. I was just like, what? How did you get there so fast? And yeah, like he's just like really, really good at it. So we definitely utilize some of his skills to get some wins. But yeah, that's so. It's just one of the best feelings is finding out that people have have played played games that either you worked on or that your friends have worked on, and you just didn't even know, and they didn't even know that you're connected. Oh, it feels so good.
So Hood is it an asymmetric multiplayer, or is it fully competitive or cooperative?
So you're working in two different teams, and so yeah, competitive against the other team, and obviously there's AI as well. So you are competing against the other team to steal the key to the vault, find the vault, steal the treasure, and take the treasure back to the extraction point and extract it. It becomes kind of a little bit of a I think like they were sort of aiming more for like stealth, and I think if you do play stealth, then you actually do a lot better. But it becomes a bit of a free for all towards the end.
I was going to say, multiplayer who does stealth, nobody does that. It's always a bloodbath.
There's the whole time element, right? Of like, oh god, like if we don't get stop these guys from extracting the chest, we're going to lose. So especially towards the end, you kind of throw stealth out the window and start just charging in there just to interrupt them as best you can in like this desperate. Suicide charge is the best way to describe it. So it definitely gets a little bit manic towards the end, but it's so fun. It's so fun.
Cool.
They did a great job.
Cool. So to just wrap up, then can we talk a little bit about your narrative talks that you give, because you give quite regular talks, I believe, as well.
I've done a few. They're always terrifying. The first one I gave was at Norwich Games Festival a few years ago, and I've never been so scared in my life. But that was a talk about just like an introduction to narrative design, which was in retrospect incredibly ambitious, and I definitely change a lot of that talk in retrospect because I'd only been doing narrative design for a year at that point, so and I've learned a lot since then, so I'm kind of like, that's a bit embarrassing, please don't judge me by my knowledge a year in. But yeah, I've done a couple of others since then. I've spoken at the University of Nottingham twice. I've went to Germany to speak at Womanize, a few things like that. Recently did a workshop with some school age children. So yeah, it's terrifying but rewarding afterwards.
Yeah. And do you have any more coming up at all that you can talk about?
Not in the imminent future, no. I'm kind of like trying to take a bit of a break from it because every time I do it, I'm like, okay, I never want to do that again. And then another one comes up and I'm like, I should probably do it. And then
Yeah.
I do it, and then I'm like, oh, why did I do that? Even though it tends to go well, but it's just it's so nerve-wracking, especially as an introvert, to be like standing in front of people and, oh God, it's like the imposter syndrome sets in and,
Yeah.
all the feelings.
And I know it well. I know it all too well. So, if you ever do a new one, I hope I can virtually attend it or somehow
Oh,
get,
thank you.
because I'd be super interested as well. But anyway,
Yeah,
that brings us to the end of this episode of the Weekend Catch Up Club. Sarah, I have had an amazing time. It's been a very fast hour. I think we could have kept on going for at least another hour or so. It's been amazing. So, thank you very much for taking the time out to join me today.
Well, thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be invited.
And where can people get in touch with you if they have questions about narrative design, your talks, learning, whatever about the industry?
Sure. So I'm on Twitter under, I think I'm under Sarah Longthorne. I also go by SJ. But yeah, Sarah Longthorne on Twitter, and also that's my website, sarahlongthorne.com. So I've got a couple of my earlier talks up there. Again, they're very early. Please don't judge me. And yeah, that's just kind of like my general place for this is everything I have done that I can talk about. So yeah, but there's also a contact form on there. So you can email me or catch me on Twitter, and that's probably the main two places.
Wonderful, wonderful. So, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for tuning in and watching this episode of the Weekend Catch Up Club. I'll be back next week with another great guest. But again, a very special and huge thank you for Sarah for taking time out of her very busy day to give us this fun chat about narrative design. I hope everybody has enjoyed it. But anyway, until next time, guys, take care, and I'll see you again soon. Bye-bye.